For 20 years, I lived a lie. My children thought I was just a pathetic old man, living off their charity in their house. They didn't know about the $2 million lottery ticket that bought this place. They didn't know my name was on the deed. But after years of disrespect, they were about to find out the hard way. This is the story of how I took back my dignity. If you believe everyone deserves respect, especially from family, hit that subscribe button and follow my journey. The old recliner sighs when I settle into it. A long, weary groan of compressed springs and tired leather that I know better than my own heartbeat. It's the sound of surrender. Sarah and I bought this chair together 25 years ago. She called it the throne. And for years, it was a place of comfort, of holding my children as I read to them. Now, it's just a station for waiting for the day to end, for sleep to come, for something to change. The afternoon sun cuts a perfect, dusty rectangle across the worn Persian rug, a rug whose once vibrant reds and blues have faded to muted suggestions of their former glory. Inside that golden box, a million tiny specks of dust and life dance a silent, frantic ballet, visible only for a fleeting moment before vanishing back into the shadows. On the television, a game show host with teeth, too white for nature, is laughing. A booming, artificial sound that rattles in the high-ceilinged emptiness of the living room. A woman in a sequin sweater is jumping up and down, having just won a lifetime supply of gourmet cat food. It's all just noise. A flimsy dam against the tide of silence Sarah left behind when she passed. The distinct sound of the garage door rumbling open breaks the manufactured cheer. A few moments later, the front door clicks open, then slams shut with a jarring finality that rattles the collection of small, framed photos on the mantelpiece. Jessica and her husband, David, are home. I hear the heavy thud of Jessica's leather briefcase hitting the hardwood floor of the entryway, followed by the rustle of paper grocery bags being dropped unceremoniously on the granite kitchen counter. There's no hello. No, Dad. How was your day? I stopped expecting those pleasantries years ago. I have, it seems, become a part of the house's architecture in their eyes, as permanent and as uninteresting as the grandfather clock in the hallway, which faithfully chimes the hours away, to no one in particular. Jessica sweeps into the living room, her iPhone already pressed to her ear, one hand deftly unwinding the silk scarf from her neck. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, do a quick, critical scan of the room, cataloging every cushion out of place, every magazine not perfectly aligned. She doesn't look at me, but I feel her gaze slide over me. A brief, dismissive flicker. No. I know. Brenda. It's absolutely insane, she says, her voice a sharp staccato that cuts through the room's quiet. We're paying a mortgage the size of a small country's GDP for this place, and I still feel like we're treading water. The numbers just don't add up. She kicks off her designer heels near the doorway, letting them lie where they fall. Too sleek. Black obstacles. David appears in her wake, loosening a tie that looks like it's been strangling him all day. He grants me a small, tight-lipped nod. A gesture so fleeting, it's less a greeting and more a subconscious acknowledgement of an object in his path to the refrigerator. Honestly, Jessica continues, her voice rising with practiced indignation as she paces in front of the unlit fireplace. It's like living with a ghost who watches daytime television. I got the energy bill this morning. It's criminal. Absolutely criminal. I just don't understand where it all goes. She finally ends her call with a curt, "I'll call you back," and tosses the phone onto the sofa. The resulting silence is somehow louder and more intrusive than her conversation. It's heavy, filled with unspoken accusations. I keep my eyes fixed on the television screen, where the woman is now tearfully hugging the host, overwhelmed by her feline fortune. I can feel their presence behind me. Two black holes of ambition and stress, sucking the very warmth from the air. My gaze drifts, as it often does, to the largest photo on the mantelpiece. It's the one of Sarah and me, taken on the day we closed on this house. Back in 2004, the lottery ticket had been a fluke. A $2 quick pick I bought with the change from my coffee. A bet against the universe that, for one impossible, miraculous moment, paid out. We never told a soul. It was our secret, our miracle. The silent, invisible foundation upon which we would build the rest of our lives. I can still feel the crispness of the check in my hand. Still see Sarah standing right on this very spot. Her arms flung wide. Tears of pure, unadulterated joy streaming down her face. Our forever home. Orville, she had whispered, her voice thick with emotion. A place for our children to be safe, for our grandchildren to run and play. Her dream, our beautiful, shared dream. Now, 20 years later, it feels like I'm nothing more than a tenant in her memory, living in a house that has become a museum of what we lost. Dad. Jessica's voice cuts through my reverie. It's not a question. It's a summons. I slowly turn my head. She's holding a stack of envelopes, fanning them out like a poker hand she knows is a loser. "These came," she says. She strides over and drops them onto the small end table beside my chair. The slap of the paper against the polished wood is sharp and definitive. The utility bill, the water bill, the internet bill. They're all 30% higher than last quarter. I don't know what you do all day, sitting in this room, but it's costing us a fortune. I look down at the envelopes. The little plastic windows all show the same names, Jessica and David Miller. My name is nowhere to be found. A familiar. Dull ache begins to throb in my chest. It's the feeling of being erased. The urge to speak the truth rises in my throat. Hot and bitter. I want to say, the furnace that keeps you from freezing in the Ohio winter was paid for in cash. By me. I want to say, the lights you complain about are powered by a foundation I built for this family. A foundation you know nothing about. But the words die before they can be born. Arguing with Jessica is like throwing stones into a hurricane. It's a pointless, exhausting exercise in futility. Suddenly, the sliding glass door to the backyard groans open and a flash of bright pink comes hurtling into the room. A whirlwind of youthful energy. Grandpa. Lily, my 8-year-old granddaughter, launches herself at me, wrapping her small, strong arms around my neck. She smells of freshly cut grass, crayons, and the faint, sweet scent of the cookies she sneaked after school. I hug her back, burying my face in her hair. Breathing in, the only source of unconditional love this house has left to offer. She is Sarah's joy made real, a bright, beautiful echo of the best person I ever knew. "Look what I made in art class today," she says, her voice bubbling with excitement as she pulls away. She shoves a waxy, colorful drawing into my hands. It's a picture of a grand, slightly crooked castle with a bright yellow sun smiling down on it. In front of the castle are two stick figures, holding hands. One is tall, with a scribble of gray hair. The other is small, wearing a pink dress and a giant, happy grin. "It's us, Grandpa," she says proudly, pointing a small finger at the drawing. "You and me, in our castle." I feel my throat tighten. A knot of emotion I can't swallow. "It's beautiful. Sweet pea," I manage to say, my voice thick. "The most beautiful castle I have ever seen." Jessica watches us from the kitchen doorway, her arms crossed. Her expression, a mixture of impatience and something else I can't quite decipher. "Lily, honey, go, wash your hands for dinner. And don't bother Grandpa. He's had a long day of resting." Lily's brilliant smile falters for just a second. A cloud passing over her personal sun, but she nods dutifully and scampers off towards the bathroom. The warmth and light in the room seem to leave with her. Later that evening, long after the sun has set, my son Mark stops by. He never calls first. He just appears. A ghost at the feast. Usually when the scent of desperation is clinging to him, he looks worn down. The youthful optimism he once had now eroded away, leaving behind worry lines and shadows under his eyes. He gives me a quick, one-armed hug that feels more like a formality than an act of affection before collapsing onto the sofa. "Hey, Dad," he says, raking a hand through his thinning hair. "Tough week." I can hear the low murmur of Jessica and David arguing in the kitchen. They're hushed. Angry words, a familiar soundtrack to our evenings. Mark leans forward, resting his elbows on his knees, creating a small, private space of conspiracy between us. "Listen, Dad, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't an emergency. I'm really in a jam. The business, things are tight, really tight. I miscalculated some inventory, and now I'm short with my supplier. I just need a little help to get over the hump. $5,000. That's all. Just a loan. I'll pay you back as soon as the next shipment sells. I swear." His eyes, the same deep brown eyes as his mother's, plead with me. They're the same eyes he had when he was 10, begging for the new bicycle all his friends had. But the childhood innocence is long gone, replaced by a desperate, weary shame. I know his business is a black hole, a series of bad gambles and poorly thought-out ventures he refuses to learn from. I've bailed him out before. 3 times, to be exact. Each time, he swore it would be the last. I can't. "Mark," I say, my voice softer than I intend it to be. "The well is dry. I just can't." His face hardens instantly. The desperation curdles into a bitter resentment. "You can't. Or you won't," he scoffs. "Come on. Dad, I'm your son. You're just sitting on your retirement savings while I'm out here drowning. What are you even saving it for? You don't do anything. You don't go anywhere." He doesn't wait for an answer. He pushes himself up from the sofa, his body coiled with frustration. He lets out a bitter, humorless laugh. Unbelievable. Just unbelievable. He turns and storms out the front door, slamming it so hard a piece of mail flutters from the entryway table to the floor. After he's gone, the house feels heavy, suffocating. The air is thick with failure and disappointment. I push myself out of the recliner, my joints protesting, and make the long walk down the hall to my bedroom. It's a simple room, furnished with the same solid, dependable pieces Sarah and I bought at an estate sale 30 years ago. In the corner stands an old oak dresser. It was my father's and his father's before him. The wood is dark and heavy, and its surface is a roadmap of a long life, scratches from misplaced keys. A faint water ring from a forgotten glass. I run my hand over its smooth, cool surface until my fingers find the small, ornate brass keyhole on the top drawer. The drawer is locked. It's always locked. My children think it's where I keep old, sentimental trinkets. They have no idea. Inside that drawer, beneath a stack of old, black and white photographs and Sarah's favorite cashmere sweater that still faintly smells of her perfume, is a thick, cream-colored folder. And inside that folder, protected by a plastic sleeve, is the deed to this house. The deed to 124 Maplewood Drive, Maple Creek, Ohio. Free and clear. Paid in full. In the name of Orville Miller. A single, bitter thought surfaces. Clear and sharp as glass. They don't see a father. They see a wallet, and they think it's empty. The next day, the tension is a physical presence in the house. It hangs in the air like thick summer humidity, making it hard to breathe. Jessica communicates only through loud sighs and the aggressive, percussive clatter of pots and pans in the kitchen. That evening, she calls us to the dinner table with a sharp, "Dinner's ready." Her voice is brittle. "We need to have a family meeting," she announces as we sit down, the words dropping like stones into the quiet. The meal is overcooked chicken, instant mashed potatoes, and canned green beans. Everything is beige. Everything tastes like ash. Lily is unnaturally still, her fork moving the food around her plate. Sensing the approaching storm, Mark is there again, his face sullen. David stares intently at his plate, as if the answers to the universe are hidden in the gravy. Jessica places her fork and knife down with a deliberate, metallic click. She surveys the table, her gaze moving from David to Mark, and finally, settling on me. It's as cold and impersonal as a banker's. "David and I have been talking," she begins, her tone clipped and professional. "We've run the numbers, and the simple fact is, things are unsustainable. We are working ourselves to the bone just to keep this house afloat." Mark gives a short plicinate, sharp nod of agreement. A loyal lieutenant supporting his general. "So," she continues, taking a long, slow sip of water, "we've made a decision. We've established a new household contribution policy. It's the only way to be fair, and for everyone to pull their weight." She looks directly at me now, her eyes boring into mine. The last, tattered remnants of family affection have been stripped away. This is a boardroom negotiation. "So, Dad, it's simple. Starting next month, on the 1st, your financial contribution to the household will be $2,000. The number hangs in the air. Obscene. "If you can't manage that," she adds, her voice softening into a grotesque parody of sympathy, "we understand completely, and will be more than happy to help you look for a nice retirement community. There are some lovely ones just outside the city. Very affordable." An eviction notice, wrapped in the cheap, transparent ribbon of false concern. I look at the faces of my children, my daughter, who sees me as a line item on a budget spreadsheet, my son, who sees me as a failed ATM, my son-in-law, a silent, spineless accomplice. Only my granddaughter, Lily, looks broken. Her big brown eyes are wide, swimming with tears. She's fighting to hold back, her lower lip trembling. She looks from her mother to me, a silent, desperate plea in her gaze. I don't say a word. There is nothing left to say. The words I've swallowed for years have turned to stone in my gut. Slowly, deliberately, I place my knife and fork together on my plate. I pick up my paper napkin and fold it neatly in half. I push my chair back from the table. The scrape of the old wooden legs against the floor is the only sound in the suddenly silent room. It sounds like a closing gate. I stand up, my back straight, and without looking at any of them again, I turn and walk to my room. I close the door behind me, and the soft click of the latch echoes in the hallway, a sound as final as a vault being sealed shut. I stand there in the darkness, my back pressed against the solid wood of the door, and I don't feel sadness. I don't feel betrayal. I feel a strange, cold, liberating clarity. For the first time in years, I know exactly what I have to do. My hand, hanging by my side, slowly curls into a fist, so tight that my knuckles burn and the joints ache. The silence from the other side of the door is absolute. They have fired their final shot. They just don't know that I'm the one holding all the ammunition. My back was pressed hard against the solid oak of the bedroom door. The wood cool even through the thin fabric of my shirt. On the other side, there was only silence. A thick, expectant silence that was somehow more damning than any shouting match could ever have been. My fist was still clenched at my side. A tight, painful knot of bone and sinew. The knuckles white with a pressure that had been building for 20 years. But the storm inside me, the hurricane of grief and anger and betrayal that had been raging for so long, was gone. In its place was a strange and profound calm. It was a cold, hard, liberating clarity. The kind a man finds when he has finally lost everything he thought he was supposed to protect. I did not sleep that night. Sleep felt like a luxury I hadn't earned, a surrender I could no longer afford. Instead, I sat in the worn armchair by the window, the one Sarah had reupholstered herself, and watched the moon make its slow, silent journey across the star-dusted Ohio sky. The house was a living thing around me, breathing with the low hum of the refrigerator and the gentle groans of settling wood. These were the sounds of my life, the soundtrack to my slow erasure. I thought of Sarah, of her boundless optimism, her unshakable belief in the goodness of her children. What would she think if she could see them now? Would she have recognized the cold-eyed strangers who sat at her dinner table, carving up my dignity like a Sunday roast? For a long time, my grief for her was tangled up with a desperate need to preserve the family she had built, to keep her dream alive, even if it meant my own peace had to die. But sitting there, in the profound loneliness of the pre-dawn dark tough, I finally understood the family Sarah and I had built was gone. It had died long ago, and I was just a ghost haunting the ruins, tending to a memory. Trying to save a dream for people who had turned it into a prison was not honoring her. It was betraying myself. The love I felt for my wife did not require me to be a doormat for my children. With that realization, something inside me shifted, settled into place with the final, satisfying click of a lock. The grief remained, a gentle ache for the woman I would love until my last breath. But the obligation, the heavy, suffocating weight of it, was gone. When the first pale fingers of dawn began to stretch across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and soft gray, I stood up. My joints protested, but my mind was clear. I walked over to the old oak dresser, my father's dresser, and pulled a small, ornate brass key from the pocket of my trousers. The key slid into the lock of the top drawer with a familiar whisper of metal on metal. I turned it, and the lock disengaged with a solid, satisfying thud. The drawer slid open silently. The faint scent of cedar and Sarah's lavender sachets greeted me like an old friend. I carefully lifted out her favorite cashmere sweater, pressing it to my face for a moment, then set it aside. Beneath it lay the folder. Me fingers, steady and sure, lifted it out. Inside, the cream-colored paper felt heavy. Important. I slid the deed out from its protective plastic sleeve. The paper was thick, slightly yellowed at the edges. The typed letters a stark, formal black. And there, at the bottom, was the signature of the county clerk. And above it, the legal designation of ownership, property of Orville Miller. My name. Not Dad. Not Grandpa. Not a burden or a tenant or a ghost. Orville Miller. A man who had worked and loved and built something. A man who owned this ground, these walls, this roof. Holding that paper was like holding my own spine in my hands. It was a reminder of who I was before they had decided who I should be. The decision, which had been a terrifying, abstract thing in the dark of night, now felt simple. It felt right. I knew I couldn't make the call from inside these walls. The house had ears. Jessica was a light sleeper. And David had the uncanny ability to appear whenever he was least wanted. After a breakfast I didn't taste, and a morning of avoiding my daughter's cold, questioning glares. I told her I was going for a drive to clear my head. She simply shrugged, a gesture of profound indifference. I drove not to the park, but to the public library downtown. I sat in my car in the far corner of the parking lot. The quiet hum of the engine, a comforting presence. Using the library's public Wi-Fi on my old, slow tablet, I began my search. I didn't want the biggest real estate agency in town. The one with the flashy billboards and smiling, predatory agents. I searched for smaller, independent brokers. I typed in words like discreet, private sales, estate services. One name kept coming up: Arthur Vance. He had been in the business for 40 years. His website was simple, professional, and his photo showed a man in his late 60s with kind eyes and a face that suggested he had seen it all. The testimonials spoke of his integrity and his quiet, no-nonsense approach. He was the one. My heart hammered against my ribs as I dialed the number. This was it. The first active step, the first stone to be laid on a new path. It rang 3 times. Arthur Vance speaking. His voice was calm, measured. Mr. Vance, I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. My name is Orville Miller. I have a property on Maplewood Drive that I would like to discuss selling, and discretion is of the utmost importance. There was a brief pause on the other end. I understand, Mr. Miller, he said. Discretion is the cornerstone of my business. When and where would be a good place for us to meet? We settled on a small, nondescript coffee shop in the next town, over a place called The Daily Grind. The next morning, as I ended the call, I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in a very long time: control. The Daily Grind smelled of burnt coffee and industrial cleaning supplies. It was perfect. Anonymous. I sat in a booth in the back, the worn vinyl cool against my back, clutching the folder that contained my future. Arthur Vance arrived exactly on time. He was just as his picture suggested, neatly dressed in a simple tweed jacket, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He shook my hand firmly. Orville, a pleasure to meet you. I didn't waste time with small talk. I opened the folder and laid the deed on the table between us. along with the original property assessment from 2004. He put on a pair of reading glasses and examined the documents in silence. His brow furrowed in concentration. He read them once, then a second time. Finally, he took off his glasses and looked at me. To his expression, a mixture of professional curiosity and human compassion. "This is all in your name, bought and paid for 2 decades ago," he said. Less a question than a statement of fact. "Yes," I said. "It is." "And you are currently living in the house?" "Yes, with my daughter, her husband, and my granddaughter." He leaned back, his gaze steady. "Forgive me for being blunt, Orville, but when a man in your position calls me about a discreet sale of a home his family lives in, there's usually a story there." And so I told him. I told him everything. The lottery win, keeping the secret, the passing of my wife, the slow, creeping entitlement of my children, the constant disrespect, the demands for money, and finally, the ultimatum delivered at the dinner table. I spoke in a low, even voice, laying out the facts without emotion, like a witness giving a statement. When I finished, Arthur was silent for a long time, looking from my face to the documents on the table. A quiet, righteous anger seemed to simmer behind his calm demeanor. "So let me get this straight," he said finally, his voice dangerously soft. "You own a $700,000 property, free and clear, and your own children are trying to charge you $2,000 a month in rent, under threat of eviction to a nursing home. That is the situation." "Yes," I confirmed. He shook his head slowly, a look of profound disbelief on his face. He pushed the documents back towards me. "Orville," he said, his voice firm with conviction. "This isn't just a sale. This is justice, and I would be honored to help you execute it." 2 days later, I sat across from him again, this time in his quiet, unassuming office. He had laid out a comprehensive market analysis and a sales strategy designed for speed and discretion. He had a list of pre-qualified buyers looking for exactly this kind of property. On the desk between us was the listing agreement. It was the point of no return. My hand trembled slightly as I picked up the pen he offered me. I thought of Sarah's smile. I thought of Lily's drawing of our castle. I thought of the cold, dead look in Jessica's eyes at the dinner table. My hand steadied. I signed my name Orville Miller on the dotted line. As I pushed the contract back across the desk to him, a small, involuntary smile touched my lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. It was the smile not of a man who had won, but of a man who had finally chosen not to lose. Life in the house continued on its tense, cold trajectory. Jessica, assuming my silence was a sign of defeat, escalated her campaign of passive aggression. A few days after my meeting with Arthur, I found a stack of glossy brochures on the table beside my recliner. Golden Meadows, Retirement Villas, Serenity Gardens Senior Living, Willow Creek Assisted Care. They were filled with pictures of smiling, silver-haired strangers playing shuffleboard and participating in group watercolor classes. It was a message, as subtle as a sledgehammer. I picked them up, thumbed through the pages filled with their false promises of a gentle, managed decline, and felt nothing but a cold, detached amusement. It was like watching an opponent on a chessboard meticulously set up a trap, completely oblivious to the fact that the game they were playing was already over. The plan went into motion with quiet efficiency. Arthur was as good as his word. The for sale sign would only exist online, visible to a select group of agents. All showings would be scheduled on weekday mornings, between 10 and noon. When Jessica and David were at their jobs and Lily was at school, my role was simple: be absent. The first showing was scheduled for a Tuesday. That morning, I told Jessica I was going to take Lily to the park after I picked her up from school. "Fine," she'd said, not looking up from her laptop. "Just make sure she finishes her homework." That afternoon, as a young, hopeful couple walked through the rooms of my house, dreaming of where they would put their furniture and raise their children, I was sitting on a park bench, pushing my granddaughter on the swings. The sun was warm on my face, and the sound of her laughter, bright and carefree as it soared towards the sky, was the only thing that mattered. The squeak of the swing set's chains was a rhythm of hope. I thought to myself, this is what I am fighting for. Not the house, not the money. This peace, this simple, untainted joy. The close call happened the following week. It was a Thursday. Arthur had 2 showings scheduled back to back. I was at the same park with Lily, watching her on the merry-go-round, when I saw David's car turn onto our street. A full 2 hours before he was normally home. My blood ran cold. My heart leaped into my throat. Affrontique. Trapped bird. I watched in horror as he pulled into the driveway, where Arthur's discreet sedan was parked at the curb. I saw him get out of his car, his brow furrowed with suspicion. This was it. It was over. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text from Arthur. "Stay calm. I have this." I watched. My breath held. As Arthur and the prospective buyers exited my front door, David walked towards them, his posture aggressive. I saw Arthur intercept him. Smiling pleasantly, he held up a clipboard and pointed towards the telephone pole on the edge of my lawn. I couldn't hear their words, but I could see Arthur's body language. He was calm, professional, gesturing with authority. He adopted the unmistakable air of a city official. After a few minutes of conversation, David, looking slightly annoyed but placated, shrugged and went inside. Arthur and the buyers got into their car and drove away. A minute later, Arthur called me. "He bought it," Arthur said, a note of relief in his voice. Told him we were city surveyors checking the property lines for a new fiber optic cable installation. He didn't question it. "We're clear." I leaned back on the bench, my body weak with relief. "Thank you, Arthur," I whispered. The call I had been waiting for came the very next evening. I was in my room, the house mercifully quiet. My phone buzzed. It was Arthur. "Orville," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "The young couple from the park, the ones who were there during the survey, they've put in an offer." I held my breath. "It's $20,000 above your asking price," he continued. "All cash. No contingencies. They want to close in 2 weeks." It was perfect. Better than I could have ever imagined. It felt like a sign from the universe. A confirmation that I was on the right path. That Sarah, somewhere, was nodding her approval. "I accept," I said, my voice clear and strong. That night, after everyone was asleep, I slipped out to the library again. I sat in the silent, empty parking lot under the orange glow of a single street lamp. I navigated to Arthur's real estate website and found the listing for my property. There, it was the picture of the front of my house, the place I had called home for 20 years. And next to the photo, in bold, bright red letters that seemed to burn through the screen, were two words: sale pending. The clock was ticking. The two words glowed on the tablet screen, stark and absolute against the digital darkness of the library parking lot. Sale pending. It wasn't just a status update. It was a promise. A verdict. A quiet declaration of war from a man they had long considered disarmed. I stared at those words until they blurred, the orange glow of the single street lamp reflecting in my eyes. The ticking clock wasn't just in my head anymore. It was out there in the world, counting down the final days of the life I had known, and the final days of my children's comfortable, unearned illusion. Returning to the house that night was different. Crossing the threshold felt like an actor stepping onto a stage for the final act of a play. The set was the same, the familiar scent of lemon polish and old books, the low hum of the furnace kicking on, but my role had changed. I was no longer a passive character in their drama. I was the playwright. And the final, shocking plot twist was locked securely in my mind. The next morning, I began my work. There was a new rhythm to my days, a secret purpose that hummed beneath the surface of my quiet routine. I started in the attic, the repository of forgotten things. Jessica and David saw me carrying down an empty cardboard box and assumed the inevitable. I saw my daughter whisper something to her husband as I passed them in the hallway. A smug, triumphant little smile playing on her lips. She thought her campaign of psychological warfare, with its artillery of retirement home brochures, had been successful. She thought she had broken me. Glad to see you're finally getting organized. Dad, she said later that afternoon, her voice dripping with false sweetness as I taped the bottom of a second box. Don't strain yourself. We can hire someone to help with the heavy lifting when the time comes. I'm fine, Jessica, I said, my voice even. Just getting rid of some old clutter. Clutter. That's what these treasures were to them. But to me, each item was a piece of a life, a fragment of a love story. I didn't pack clothes or furniture. I packed the things that had no monetary value and were therefore, to me, priceless. The first box was filled with photographs. I spent hours sitting on the dusty floor of the attic, sifting through a lifetime of memories. There was Sarah and me on our wedding day, young and impossibly hopeful. There were pictures of a chubby-cheeked Jessica taking her first steps on the very lawn she now considered hers. There was Mark, grinning with a missing front tooth, holding up a string of tiny fish from our trip to the lake. Who were these happy strangers? Where had they gone? I carefully wrapped the silver-framed portraits in old newspaper, my fingers tracing the smiling faces, saying a silent goodbye not to the memory, but to the hope that those people could ever return. The next box was for the things my hands had made. The small, intricately carved wooden bird I had whittled for Sarah on our 10th anniversary. The wobbly bookshelf I'd built for Mark's college dorm room, which he'd left behind without a second thought. I ran my hand over the smooth, worn wood, feeling the echo of the man. I used to be a man who built things for his family. I wrapped each piece in old towels, cushioning them against the journey ahead. The last, and most important, box was for Lily. It held every drawing she had ever given me, from the first chaotic scribbles to the recent proud portrait of her and me in our castle. It held the little clay pinch pot she'd made for my birthday, which I used to hold my spare change. These were the artifacts of a love that was pure and real, untainted by greed or expectation. As I placed her drawing of the castle on top, I felt a single, hot tear trace a path through the dust on my cheek. I wasn't just saving my own dignity, I was saving this precious, fragile connection. From the toxicity that had poisoned the rest of the house. Each afternoon, when the house was empty, my old station wagon became my escape vehicle. I'd load 1 or 2 carefully sealed boxes into the back and drive across town to a place called Secure Space Storage. It was a new facility, a place of clean, white corridors and bright, anonymous fluorescent lights. I had rented a small 10 by 10 unit online. It was a sterile, featureless box, a blank slate. After carrying my precious cargo inside, I would stand for a moment in the quiet, climate-controlled air. Each time I pulled down the rolling metal door, the loud, definitive clang echoed in the silence. It was the sound of a drawbridge being raised, the sound of a vault being secured. It was the sound of freedom. One evening, I was in my room, ostensibly reading a book, but really just listening to the rhythms of the house. The door was ajar, and I heard Jessica and David talking in the hallway, their voices low but clear. I saw another brochure came in the mail today. David said, "The one with the golf course. Looks nice." "It's fine," Jessica replied, her voice dismissive. "He's finally getting the message. I saw him clearing out more of his junk today. Honestly, I can't wait to get this room back. I was looking at Pelotons online. A home gym would be great." David agreed. "We could put some free weights in the corner. Maybe a mirror on that wall." I closed my eyes. My room. The room where I had slept beside my wife for 30 years. The room where I had held her hand in the final, fading hours of her life. They were talking about it like it was an underutilized storage space they were about to reclaim. I felt a surge of cold fire in my veins. But I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. Their arrogance was my shield. Their blindness, my greatest asset. Let them plan their gym. Let them measure the walls. They were rearranging deck chairs on a ship they didn't know was sinking. The phone call came 2 days later. It was Mark. His voice was different this time. The anger was gone, replaced by a raw, ragged desperation that was almost pitiful. Dad, please," he began, his voice cracking. There was the unmistakable sound of a sob being choked back. "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for what I said. I'm going to lose everything. They're going to take my car. I got an eviction notice on my apartment. I have nowhere to go. Please. Dad. Just a little. Anything. I'm begging you." The 10-year-old boy, begging for a bicycle, was back. Only now he was a grown man, begging for a lifeline. A part of me, the old part, the father who was programmed to rescue his children, wanted to give in. But the new Orville, the man who had signed the contract, knew better. True love, I was beginning to understand, wasn't always about saying yes. Sometimes, it was about having the strength to say no. "Mark," I said, and my voice was gentle but unyielding, like stone covered in moss. "I love you, but I cannot fix this for you. I have bailed you out for the last time. The only person who can save you now is you. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy with his brokenness. I heard a sniffle, then a shaky breath. "So that's it," he whispered. "You're just cutting me off." "No, son," I said, the words costing me more than he would ever know. "I am setting you free." I ended the call and sat there for a long time. The quiet hum of the phone in my hand, the only sound. A boundary had been drawn. A painful, necessary line in the sand. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Arthur. The words were simple, factual, and they made my world stand still. Closing is confirmed. Thompson Law Offices. This Friday, 10 a.m. Friday. It was Tuesday. 3 days. 72 hours. The countdown had begun in earnest. The world suddenly seemed sharper. The colors brighter. The sounds clearer. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall was a beat in the final, thundering crescendo. The night before the closing, I couldn't stay in my room. After Jessica and David had gone to bed, their door clicking shut on their little world of plans and delusions, I walked through the dark, silent house. It was a pilgrimage. I didn't turn on any lights, letting the moonlight filtering through the windows be my guide. I stood in the living room, my hand resting on the cool, smooth back of Sarah's recliner. I remembered watching old movies here, her feet tucked under my legs. I walked into the kitchen and stood by the breakfast nook where we had drunk thousands of cups of coffee, planning our lives, celebrating small victories, and comforting each other through sorrows. I walked out onto the back porch and looked at the great oak tree we had planted together as a sapling. Its branches now, a mighty canopy against the stars. This house wasn't just wood and nails. It was a living archive of our love. And for years, I had allowed that love to be desecrated by bitterness and greed. My actions now weren't about destroying a home. They were about protecting a memory. I was cutting out the cancer to save the heart. This wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of preservation. A final, silent goodbye to the good years, untangling them from the bad. Friday morning. The sun rose into a brilliant, cloudless sky. Today, I showered and shaved with meticulous care. I chose one of my best shirts, a crisp blue Oxford that Sarah had always liked, and a pair of freshly pressed trousers. I was putting on my armor. As I walked through the kitchen, Jessica was there, pouring coffee. She looked me up and down, a sarcastic, dismissive smirk on her face. Going somewhere special, she asked, or just practicing for the shuffleboard tournament at Serenity Gardens? I looked at her. My daughter. A woman so blinded by her own wants, she couldn't see the cliff edge she was standing on. And I felt a profound, aching pity for her. Just running an errand. Jessica, I said, my voice perfectly calm. I have some papers to sign. The law office was a quiet sanctuary of glass and polished mahogany. The young couple was already there. The same ones from the park. They were vibrating with a nervous, joyful energy that was infectious. They saw me, and their faces broke into wide mesas. They saw me, and their faces broke into wide and calm, grateful smiles. They talked about their plans, about painting the nursery, about planting a vegetable garden in the backyard. They saw a future in my house, a happy one. We sat around a long, imposing conference table. The lawyer, a kind-faced woman named Mrs. Thompson, explained each document with practiced patience. I barely heard her words. I was watching the young couple, seeing the love and respect they had for each other. The way he would reach over and squeeze her hand. They were the ghost of Sarah and me, sitting in that very room. When the time came, my hand was steady as I signed my name, over and over. Orville Miller, Orville Miller, Orville Miller. With each signature, I felt a weight I didn't even know I was carrying dissolve into the air. It was done. Mrs. Thompson slid a thick, pale blue cashier's check across the polished table towards me. Congratulations, Mr. Miller, she said with a warm smile. The transaction is complete. I picked up the check. It was just a piece of paper, but it felt heavy. Solid. It was the physical manifestation of my secret. My freedom. My justice. I folded it carefully and placed it in the inside pocket of my jacket. I was on the highway, driving home. When my phone rang, I didn't need to look at the screen. I knew who it was. The plan had been perfect. But I hadn't accounted for the unpredictable chaos of life in this case. An overturned pickle truck that had shut down 2 lanes of traffic. I answered the call. Hello, Jessica. Dad, where are you? Her voice was a high-pitched shriek of panic and confusion. There is a moving truck parked in front of the house, a huge one. They said they're here for the new owners. Dad, what is going on? Did you forget to pay a bill? Are we being foreclosed on? What did you do? I looked at the bumper-to-bumper traffic in front of me. Then at the thick manila envelope sitting on the passenger seat. It contained my copies of the closing documents, the final weapon, the truth. The traffic began to inch forward. I could see my exit up ahead. I was almost there. I'm 5 minutes away. Jessica, I said, my voice as calm and steady as a frozen river. Stay right where you are. We need to talk. I ended the call, dropped the phone onto the seat next to the envelope, and pressed my foot on the accelerator. I was driving home for the very last time. The final 5 minutes of that drive were the longest of my life. The familiar green blur of manicured lawns and towering maple trees that lined Maplewood Drive, a sight that had once brought me a sense of peace and arrival, now felt like a foreign country. Each house I passed was a landmark in a life that was no longer mine. There was the Hendersons' place, where I'd helped Jim build that very fence 20 years ago. There was the O'Connells, where Sarah and I had attended a dozen summer barbecues. It was a street saturated with memories, and I was driving through them like a ghost, a visitor from another time. Then I saw it, my house, and in front of it, a monolithic beast of a moving truck, its diesel engine idling with a low, impatient rumble that seemed to make the very air vibrate. The company logo on its side was big and bold, New Beginnings Moving Co. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. And there, on the perfect green lawn that I had mowed and tended for 2 decades, stood my daughter and her husband. They were not a couple. They were 2 separate statues of panic. David was frozen, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his shoulders hunched as if expecting a physical blow. Jessica was pacing, a caged animal, her phone still pressed to her ear as if she believed it could somehow offer a solution. Her movements were jerky, frantic, her face a mask of disbelief and rising fury. I pulled my old station wagon into the driveway. The crunch of the tires on the gravel, a sound that seemed unnaturally loud, a signal that the final scene was about to begin. The engine sputtered off, and for a moment, I just sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel. This was it, the precipice. I wasn't afraid. The fear had been burned out of me in the crucible of that final, humiliating dinner. All that was left was a profound, bone-deep resolve. I wasn't here to fight. I was here to end the fight. Taking a slow, steadying breath, I picked up the thick manila envelope from the passenger seat. My armor, my verdict, my truth. I stepped out of the car, the door closing behind me with a solid, definitive thud. Jessica's head snapped towards the sound, her eyes, wide and wild, locked onto mine. She ended her call, shoving the phone into her purse as she marched across the lawn towards me, David trailing a few steps behind like a reluctant shadow. "Dad, what is going on?" she shrieked, her voice a high-pitched, ragged thing, on the edge of hysteria. The whole neighborhood could hear her. "Who are these people? They have paperwork saying they bought the house. They said the closing was this morning. This is insane. Did you forget to pay the mortgage? Are we being foreclosed on? What did you do?" Her questions came out in a rapid-fire barrage, a spray of shrapnel designed to wound and confuse, but I was no longer a target she could hit. I stood my ground, my feet planted firmly on the driveway that I had paid for, and I waited for her to run out of ammunition. When she finally paused, breathless and glaring, I did not say a word. With maple scent, words were her weapon, her tool for twisting reality. I would not engage her on that battlefield. Instead, I held up the manila envelope. It was a simple, quiet gesture, but it silenced her more effectively than any shout could have. Her eyes narrowed. Suspicious. "What is that?" I stepped forward and simply held it out to her. She hesitated for a moment, then snatched it from my hand. Her fingers rough against mine, she tore at the flap with an impatient, jagged motion, her breath coming in short, angry little puffs. She pulled out the stack of papers. The first page was the settlement statement. Her eyes scanned the page, her expression shifting from anger to utter confusion. I watched the cognitive dissonance war across her features as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. She saw the address. She saw the sale price. And then she saw the names: seller Orville Miller, buyer Jonathan and Amanda Carmichael. I watched the exact moment the truth pierced through her armor of self-righteous delusion. It wasn't a sudden explosion, but a slow, horrifying implosion. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin a waxy, translucent white, the color of bleached bone. Her eyes, which had been darting frantically across the page, froze on my name. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her entire body went rigid, as if she'd been turned to stone. The papers, suddenly too heavy for her nerveless fingers, slipped from her grasp. A single sheet, the one with our names on it, fluttered in the gentle breeze before coming to rest on a patch of bright green grass. A stark white flag of surrender. "No," she whispered. The word, a tiny, broken thing. A puff of air. "No. It's not possible. This is our house." Her eyes lifted from the fallen paper to my face. They were no longer angry. They were filled with a dawning, bottomless horror. The look of someone who has just realized the ground beneath their feet was never solid ground at all. And in that moment, seeing the utter, soul-shattering collapse of her entire world, a world built on a foundation of lies, she had told herself, I finally spoke. The words I had swallowed for years rose not in a torrent of rage, but in a calm, quiet, inexorable tide. "It was never your house, Jessica," I said, and my voice was clearer and steadier than it had been in years. It was the voice of a man who finally knew his own worth. "It has always been my house. I bought it. With my money. 20 years ago. It was meant to be a home for this family. A gift. But you and your brother, you stopped seeing it as a home. You started seeing it as a property, an asset, and you saw me as an obstacle, a burden you had to manage." I took a step closer, my gaze unwavering. "You sat at my table, in my chair, and you tried to evict me from my own home. You threatened me with a retirement facility so you could have this room for your exercise equipment. I let the words hang in the air, each one a small, hard stone of truth. You didn't just disrespect me, Jessica. You tried to erase me. You decided I was worthless. I looked from her shattered face to David, who stood behind her, a statue of impotent shock, his face pale and slack-jawed. So I made a decision. I continued, my voice still quiet, but carrying across the lawn with the weight of absolute finality. I decided to take back what was mine. Not the house. My dignity. The transaction is complete. The new owners are waiting to move in. According to the law, you have 30 days to vacate the premises. The silence that followed was absolute. The rumble of the moving truck, the distant chirping of birds, the rustle of leaves in the great oak tree, it all faded away. There was only the stunned, silent space between a father and his children. Then Jessica broke. It was a complete and total unraveling. The shock imploded into a storm of grief and rage. "No!" she screamed, the sound tearing from her throat, raw and animalistic. She fell to her knees on the soft grass, her hands clawing at her hair. You can't do this. This is our home. This is Lily's home. You've destroyed our family. You've destroyed everything." She began to sob. Great, racking sobs that shook her entire body. It was a performance of ultimate victimhood. In her mind, she had done nothing wrong. I was the villain, the monster who had ripped her perfect life apart. David, finally shocked into motion, rushed to her side, trying to pull her up, whispering frantic, useless things in her ear. And it was in that moment of chaos and noise that I saw a small figure appear in the open doorway of the house. It was Lily. She had clearly been drawn out by the shouting. She stood there on the threshold, her small face a canvas of confusion and fear, clutching the stuffed bunny she still slept with. She looked at her mother, kneeling and screaming on the lawn. She looked at her father, trying helplessly to console her. Then she looked at me. I met her gaze across the lawn, and my heart, which had felt like a cold, hard stone in my chest, suddenly ached. I had tried to protect her from this, but there was no escaping the fallout. I simply stood there, waiting, letting her make her own choice. She hesitated for only a second. Her big brown eyes, so much like her grandmother's, were filled with a wisdom far beyond her years. And then, she made her choice. She let go of her bunny, letting it fall to the welcome mat. And she ran. She didn't run to her hysterical mother. She didn't run to her ineffectual father. She ran across the grass, her little legs pumping. And she ran directly to me. She wrapped her arms around my legs, burying her face against my trousers, and held on tight. I looked down at the top of her head, at her messy brown ponytail, and I gently placed my hand on it. I felt the tremors of her small body as she began to cry silently into my leg. And as I stood there, with the ruins of my old family screaming on the lawn and the foundation of my new one clinging to my knees, I knew I had made the right choice. My victory was not the check in my pocket or the empty house behind me. It was this small, brave, loving child, who, in the moment of ultimate crisis, knew where to find solid ground. A month later, the world was a different place. The air I breathed was different. It was the air of a small, bright, two-bedroom apartment on the 7th floor of a downtown building. It smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. From my balcony, I didn't see manicured lawns or whispering maple trees. I saw the sprawling, glittering skyline of the city, a tapestry of a million other lives. A constant, humming reminder that the world was so much bigger than the four walls of that house on Maplewood Drive. My new life was quiet. It was simple. It was peaceful. The heavy weight of constant tension had been lifted from my shoulders. I hadn't realized how much it had been stooping me over until it was gone. I woke up when I wanted. I drank my coffee while watching the city come to life. And I spent my afternoons rediscovering the simple joy of walking, exploring the streets and parks of a city I had lived in my whole life, but had never really seen. Jessica and Mark never called. I received one venomous, rambling email from Jessica a week after the closing. Filled with accusations and blame, I read the first 2 sentences. Then I deleted it without finishing. I didn't need their forgiveness. And I certainly didn't need their rage. I had mourned the loss of my children long before I sold the house. All I had done on that final day was bury the bodies. Lily, however, was a constant, welcome ray of sunshine. David, in a surprising and singular act of paternal responsibility, arranged for me to see her twice a week. He would drop her off at the lobby of my building, his eyes always downcast, a profound and permanent shame etched onto his features. He never said much, but his actions spoke louder than any apology could have. Today was one of those days. Lily and I were sitting on the floor of my new living room. A large, leather-bound photo album open between us. It was one of the first things I had unpacked. We were looking at old pictures, and I was telling her stories about her grandmother. Grandma Sarah loved to dance, I told her, pointing to a faded photo of Sarah and me, young and laughing, spinning on a makeshift dance floor at a wedding. She said that dancing was just the heart's way of smiling out loud. Lily giggled, tracing the outline of Sarah's smiling face with her small finger. She's pretty. Yes, I said, my voice thick with a sweet, uncomplicated sadness. She was the prettiest. I looked around my small apartment. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't a castle. It was just a place. But it was my place. And it was peaceful. I realized I hadn't lost a home. I had escaped a prison that I had mistaken for a home. I had learned that dignity isn't something other people can give you. It's something you have to refuse to let them take away. Peace wasn't a location. It was a decision. Lily closed the photo album and reached into her little backpack. I made you something, she said, her expression serious and proud. She pulled out a piece of paper and handed it to me. It was a new drawing. This one wasn't of a crooked castle with a smiling sun. It was a drawing of a tall building with lots of windows. And in one of those windows, high up, were 2 stick figures. One was tall with gray hair. One was small with a pink dress. They weren't standing in front of the building. They were inside it, together, looking out at a whole city full of lights. I looked at the drawing, and then at my granddaughter, at her bright, hopeful, loving face. My heart, which had been broken and bruised for so long, felt something new. It felt full. Later that evening, long after David had picked her up, I took the drawing and a small piece of tape and I affixed it to the wall beside the balcony door. It was the first thing I had hung on my new walls. It wasn't just a drawing. It was a deed, a testament to a new home, a real one. And as I stood there, looking at it, with the city lights beginning to glitter like fallen stars outside my window, I smiled. And this time, it was the smile of a man who was truly, finally, free.